Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual breakfast sessions. I'm Larry Sashin, and today we have something that I guess will touch everyone that's listening. Pizza. From margarita to mango, is pizza turning into the next vodka? But before we do that, let's thank the people who are paying the bills. Ed Flanagan and the Error Group. Listen, if you're tired of paying those taxes on your employees. Call Ed Flanagan. His 125 IRS cafeteria plan will help you claw back some of that money and give your people some extra benefits. So call Ed Flanagan, Era Group, and back to the show. But before we do go into the show, let's introduce ourselves. Scott, say hi.
Hey everybody, I'm Scott Weiner. I'm a pizza tour guide in New York City and I run a nonprofit called Slice Out Hunger. So my life is all pizza all the time.
Fred, follow that.
I'm Fred Klashman, editor and publisher, Total Food Service.
So once again, I'm Larry Sashin, and remember back. Fred and I could tell you this when we were 18 years old, and our father sent us to the store and said, "Buy a bottle of vodka." We'd say, "Which brand?" And now, given the same situation, the person would say, "What flavor?" And I think pizza has gone the same route. You had your choice of with cheese, extra cheese, meatballs, sausage, and maybe a couple vegetables. Never this myriad of pizzas that you see on display. Scott, can you talk to this trend?
Yeah, you're completely right that the options have grown. And 50 years ago, the options were extremely limited. And I do want to point out though that just because the trend is for more topping options, it doesn't mean that that's totally brand new. What's brand new is that it's incredibly popular. But going all the way back to the dawn of pizza in America, and even before that, there were things going on in pizza that you and I would not recognize today. So I feel like it's important to point out the history, which is, and I might even flip the script on you and say, I think vodka has become the pizza of spirits. Because if you look back at the historical record, even though these places weren't the most popular, there were pizzerias in the 50s that offered frog's legs on pizza and Hungarian pizza with beets on it, like all this weird funky stuff that today we would even look at as being bizarre. Um, it was happening in the 50s as pizza really like blew up in the United States. And then when you look before that, some of the earliest pizzas in Naples, the birthplace of pizza, they had ingredients on them that we would not be finding as typical today. Like one of the first, if not the first ingredient on pizza was lard. And if you describe to somebody this pizza, this really one of the earliest ones, mid 18th century, lard, maybe a little bit of basil in the summer, maybe some pecorino, and if you were lucky, maybe some low grade olive oil. But that was it. And today, you and I would look at that and say, that's a weird concoction. Who came up with that? And the answer would be, well, the bakers who came up with pizza in the first place. So I would say there is historical precedent for these ingredient experimentations. And that's because, in my view, historically, pizza is not a recipe, it's a format. And the format is stuff that bakes onto dough. And so if stuff is the only requirement, it doesn't really matter what that stuff is. But I agree that what's going on today, it feels like it's more mind expanding and it is definitely more a heavier trend. It's way more common to find some of these things today that 30 years ago would have felt unheard of.
So, what spurred it now?
Instagram, that's the answer. The social media, the ability to be everywhere all the time. Because prior to social media and prior to the expansion of the internet, so let's just say the past 30 years, because right now we're talking, it's 2026. 30 years ago, way more isolated. You only knew what was going on in your town, which is why both of you guys, you knew what was happening in your area. And maybe if you traveled, you'd say, oh, and I went to New Haven, Connecticut, and they're putting clams on a pizza. How weird. Meanwhile, today, the vision is way wider. You can see what's going on in Osaka, Japan, literally right now by opening up your phone and flipping. And I think what used to take decades of people traveling and writing about and photographing and publishing in magazines that took 6 months to publish, now it's happening instantly. And so the timeline is shifting. What used to take a decade is now taking maybe a week.
Okay. And I want to add to that a little. It's not only what's being done, but where it's being done. Where it's being done. You know, at one point, if you wanted pizza, you had to go to the pizza place. If you look on many, many, many menus in the United States in sit-down restaurants, in the for the starters, there's a pizza, whether it's a flatbed or it's a cauliflower. When did this start?
I I don't think it's anything new that pizza is something that's available. I think what is new is people's approach to pizza. Because I think to step back and give a bigger picture look to it, the reason that so many people avoided making pizza at home until more recently is that pizza always was this thing that you only got in restaurants unless you grew up in a Southern Italian family that would make pizza on the weekend or something like that. But it was always something that required a special oven, a pizza oven, which as of the 1940s, there were ovens specifically dedicated to pizza. So there's a special oven. There's other equipment like dough mixers and cheese graters, things that you don't need to have in a restaurant unless that restaurant serves pizza. So tacking on pizza to a restaurant menu is difficult. Tacking on restaurant food to a pizza menu is less difficult. So that's why nowadays you see people are realizing that you don't necessarily need that specific equipment. You can make pizza in the way that you need to because, in a sense, having pizza on the menu just means that you're going to sell one to every table that has kids.
Okay. Okay. Any questions, Fred?
Yeah. My perspective is a little different. I think chicken and egg, I think equipment and changes in equipment have driven where pizza menus have gone. Meaning we've seen the advent of the conveyor oven. We've now seen the use of combi ovens and convection ovens, etc. Talk a little bit about what you've seen as you do your tours on a daily basis. I mean, we see wood stone ovens, we see old traditional Baker's Pride deck ovens, etc. How have you seen the evolution of equipment and what impact has that had on menus and on the industry?
Yeah, Fred, I completely agree with you that technology is what forces the change in pizza styles. Absolutely. And we can take this all the way back to the dawn of pizza, where pizza's early evolution was very likely because of pizza being used as a way to cool down overheated bread ovens. So when pizza makers or bakers or anybody lands in a place where wood is too expensive, they shift to a less expensive fuel source. And a coal-fired oven in places like the northeastern US, they bake differently, they burn differently, but you build an oven to burn coal because coal is cheaper than wood. And so the effect of that is a new style. And then, as you just said, something like a Baker's Pride or a Blodgett oven or any of these that come about in the early 40s, late 30s, early 40s, the drop in temperature of those ovens, they can't physically get above 650 most of the time, unless you break some laws. That begat a different style of pizza. The one that all of us grew up with is that style of pizza, which is why the other two, a wood-fired or a coal-fired, seem so like fantastical. They're so exciting. They're so different. So that's why now the current trend, because of stronger regulations from the DEP, stronger regulations from fire commissioners and Department of Buildings, especially in New York City or any city that has a lot of population density, is skewing more toward electric ovens. Much harder to do gas, less exciting to do something like coal or wood. And now electric ovens come about. And when you decide, okay, we're going to go with an electric oven because even though it might be a little more expensive to install it or at least to purchase the oven, and electricity is a little expensive, the ventilation is a lot cheaper. And now in the same footprint that I used to have one wood burning oven, I can now have 3 or even 4 decks, and I can set them to different temperatures. So to your point, you can do more than just pizza in the same exact footprint of what used to be 2-deck Baker's Pride.
So what have you seen in terms of the growth of the electric oven? You talked about the footprint, but what are you seeing in terms of the type of pie that's being made? Is it moved from a flat and a crisp to a Detroit? In other words, has there been an impact of what the electric oven has had on the type of pizza that's being made?
I think 2 big impacts. One of them is variation. So when you mentioned a wood stone oven, so that brand makes these very wide mouth ovens that have a gas flame. You can have coal in the other half of it. You can burn wood in some of them. But the idea of those ovens is it's really one plane of heat. So even though there's a slight gradient in temperature, you're not baking different styles in that kind of an oven. With an electric oven, you can do Detroit style that you just mentioned, which bakes at a lower temperature than something like a New York style or a Neapolitan even. You could bake a Neapolitan pizza in an electric oven. The other thing is that with a gas oven, you get most of your heat coming from the bottom. Your bottom heat is because the flame is heating up the stone is baking the product, and then the vents on the sides of those gas ovens are only giving you a little bit of airflow from the sides. But an electric oven not only has a bottom heating element, but also a top heating element. So now there's the ability to push more energy from the top of the oven, which means when I see a pizza, without even looking at the oven, you could tell it's from an electric oven, or that it's more likely from an electric oven if I see that charring on top. The pizzas that we grew up with, they didn't, unless you went to a coal-fired place or a wood-fired place, which is so rare, you saw the top was pretty consistent. Doughs were being made with oil, sometimes sugar. You were getting that even browning. And now you're getting this high intensity heat from the top just because of an electric oven. It could be at the same temperature, but if your heat's coming from the top, now you can get that charring from the top. You can spot it a mile away. And that's the new standard. I went to 3 pizzerias yesterday in the Lower East Side of New York City. 2 of them were this like electric oven, new standard of pizza. Every place that opens now is not an old school slice joint. They're new school slice joints where you see that variation. So those are the 2 big differences. A variety in styles being offered, and also the bake having more intensity from the top.
Is the type of oven also reflective? Do you find, rather than just an independent single unit, most of these folks are trying to create something that they can roll out into a franchise or multiple unit, and that's why the selection of equipment reflects that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
My assumption is that no, even though that equipment lends itself well to expansion, I think a lot of the people who are opening these new shops are people who got into pizza because they started making it during lockdowns during COVID. And so these are people approaching it from an artisan perspective. I think these people are not approaching it from the money perspective.
Business. Okay.
Yeah, and that might change because to stay in business, you have to make money. But I also think a lot of them are idealistic. They're coming into it not thinking about replication necessarily.
Yeah.
But I don't, I will have statistics about this in a few years. But right now, I don't have a direct stat to point you to.
A question I've been dying to ask you for a couple of years is, since Pepe's has gone on this grand growth spurt, et cetera, how do you take an oven that was such an iconic oven, and how do you realistically replicate an oven like that? What do
Well,
you do with that?
Pepe's is a great example for this because they have 17 locations right now and they're expanding to more. And then, by the way, when in the same breath as Pepe's, we got to talk about Sally's, which I believe has 150 locations in the works. So the direct answer here is in the case of Pepe's, you work with a single oven builder who builds replicas of the original oven in every location, which means that number one, your real estate has to be careful because you need to be in a place where you can physically and legally build that kind of oven and use that kind of oven.
A coal-fired oven.
Yeah, giant coal-fired oven, exactly. But it's the same guy. I'm looking him up in my phone right now. I got his number. But oh yeah, there he is. Anyway, they have one person who builds all the ovens, and they're 14 by 14 ovens. They're built to burn anthracite coal, And if you build one of these in Alaska, you're going to have a problem because the only place to get anthracite in North America is northeastern Pennsylvania. And so there's a physical barrier. There's a reason, guys, a reason that coal-fired pizza is a food of the northeastern United States. It's because that's where the coal is. And so I don't care what you can Amazon. You can't Amazon anthracite coal.
Yeah, shipping cost of a ton of coal. Yeah, it's hard. I
want to ask my other question too. My other question is, the space has become awful busy in terms of chains and operators. From Papa John's to Marco's. It's all over the place. What are they doing to your industry and your business? And you just talked about artisan. Does that automatically mean not artisan, or what impact have they had on your piece of the business?
That's a really phenomenal and layered question. I want to start off by pulling it back to Larry's point about the vodkification, because in a way, the expansion of the vodka business has brought more people to vodka. The fact that you can get banana vodka has gotten people who otherwise might not have been into that spirit into it. In the same way, the chains and all this flavor expansion has not cut away from the pie that is the pizza business. It's only expanded it. And you can see it in the statistics. Now is a bad time to talk about spirit sales, but vodka sales had gone up. They had not stayed the same, and flavored just ate away from unflavored. In the same way that with pizza, all these like fancy high-end pizzas that are $40 for a cheese pie, they're not taking away from the $12 for a cheese pie. They're just adding to it. And so I think that the chains and the experience with the big chains is interesting. It's a two-way street right now. For a while, it was a one-way street. The chains would do things because, and then the independents would have to catch up with them. They'd have to say, they're doing two pies for $12. I got to do something similar. And now it's kind of flipping the other way around, is that the artisan places are realizing that they'll never compete in terms of price and value, but they will be able to compete in terms of quality easily. So as long as they stand clear as a quality product, they can do it. And that's reflecting in the chains. The chains are now, look at what all the chains are doing for LTOs. It's always stuff that's like from the independents. Like right now, you mentioned Marco's. What day is it? Well, I don't know if it's even out yet. I don't even know if I'm legally allowed to say this, but let's just say this. Marco's is launching a product that was inspired by independent pizzerias coming up. And full disclosure, I did a tour with them. And so I helped them a little bit understand what this is, because they're seeing that the revolution is happening with the independents. It's not with the chains. And they see that the only way to keep up right now is really to realize that people want quality, and the American public understands that low prices are reflective of low quality ingredients. And so if you're paying $6 for a pizza, you're getting what you pay for. A cheap pizza can't be any better than its price. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean an expensive pizza must be as good as its price, but I'm always wary of cheap.
Okay.
What I mean? You can't.
Okay.
And food costs have become a line of demarcation, given what cheese costs and olive oil costs, et cetera. You can't cheap your way through this anymore.
No, sir.
All right. So let me ask you a question. I think we put the machinery in front of the product here. We're talking about how we make pizza and who's buying pizza. But let's talk the last few minutes of the show about pizza itself. In the Northeast, everybody knows Neapolitan, they know Sicilian, and then everything else is in the gray matter someplace. What kind of pizzas are being made, styles of pizza, and how do we get these?
You mean just in the Northeast?
Yeah, well, more than the Northeast is going to be listening to this. So there are different styles of pizza. You and I were talking about Detroit pizza. What's a Detroit pizza? Hawaiian pizza.
the beauty of all this is that there's two ways to talk about pizza in terms of style. Regional style, like Detroit or like New Haven, that all refers to essentially the base of the pizza. Like the primary characteristic is always the base of the pizza. You can kind of do anything you want on top of it, but it's a base of the pizza, the dough component. And then the second part is topping combination. When you say a Hawaiian pizza, that's a topping combination. That means nothing, has nothing to do with the base of the pizza. So, how do regional styles develop? How does a Chicago deep dish develop? Chicago tavern style, Altoona style pizza, Old Forge style pizza, New York by the slice, coal fired classics, all these other styles. They all develop because at a specific point in time and place geographically, there's equipment availability and ingredient availability that leads to that. So you ask about Detroit style pizza. Both Detroit style pizza and what we in New York call Sicilian pizza come from the same parent. That parent is most likely, and I'm saying most likely because we don't have a diary entry from somebody the day that they invented it. We don't have a newspaper article announcing it's it. I'm saying most likely to be accurate in the fact that we can't be perfectly accurate. They both probably come from the Sicilian focaccia called sfincione. And sfincione is the kind of food that came with people from Palermo who landed in New York City, and they landed in the Lower East Side on Elizabeth Street, 2 blocks away from everybody from Naples. People from Naples knew pizza, and they knew that pizza was not a specific food. The word pizza really referred to breads, a broad category of baked product. Pizza Napoletana, using that modifying adjective, Neapolitan pizza, meant the savory bread dish that has toppings that bakes. And we know this because we have recipes from the 10th century through late 17th century that use the word pizza to describe things that are not what you and I today call pizza. Pizza Napoletana is the specific food product from Naples that now they sell at Domino's, Pizza Hut, Papa John's, Marco's, everything. Now that's sitting 2 blocks away from people from Sicily, from Palermo, and their focaccia, of the many different focaccia throughout Italy, is a thicker, rectangular, puffy, bready. They top it with onion and garlic and tomato and breadcrumbs, and it's delicious. That becomes pizza Siciliana to the Neapolitan immigrants. Oh, this must be the Sicilians' version of what we're making. Okay, Sicilian pizza. Now, the same thing happens, although 50 years later, in Detroit, because there's a bar called Buddy's Rendezvous. It's owned in part by a guy named Gus Guerra, whose mother-in-law, a woman named Crocificia Passalacqua, is from Central Sicily. She brings her sfincione recipe to Detroit, the same parent, same sfincione recipe, but he decides to make it in the cheap pans that are available in Detroit, which happen to be those thick steel pans that the auto industry uses for hardware storage. And he decides to make it in that pan, and since that pan is twice more than double the height of a New York sheet tray pan, it means that he doesn't have to worry about topping it all the way to the edge. He can let the toppings go, and that results in this burnt cheese exterior. And that's the point of differentiation between a Sicilian pizza and what they used to call Detroit's Sicilian pizza, and what we now just call Detroit pan pizza or Detroit style pizza. I say they used to call Detroit's Sicilian pizza because if you look in newspaper articles, nobody uses the term Detroit style pizza until like 25 years ago. Up until then, all these articles in the 70s and 80s just call it Detroit's pan style pizza. It's because there was one place that was doing it in the 40s. And then when Gus Guerra sold his interest in Buddy's and bought another place called Cloverleaf, he started making that pizza at Cloverleaf. So now there are two in 1953. And one of his employees from Buddy's, a guy named Louis Tortois, opened up a place called Louis in the 70s. So now in the 70s, he only got three. So it's not a style. It's three places doing something similar. It becomes a style when you leave that place. Like in 1984, there was a guy, Ramos Pizza in, I want to say it's Galveston, Texas. There's an article in 1984 in the local newspaper saying, oh, this guy is bringing his pizza, and he also makes this Detroit-style pizza, which he's using that term because he wants the people who would not recognize this to understand that, well, you don't recognize it because it's from somewhere else. And back in the day, you needed a newspaper article to tell you that. And now we flip open the phone and we think we know everything in 12 seconds.
Oh my gosh. I expected a 2-minute answer. Uh,
Oh, was that only 2 minutes?
Oh, yeah, right. That, the history in it just boggles my mind. We take things for granted that the slice of pizza that we're eating is, just that's what's done. There is a history behind everything, and I think that's going to be our next show with you, Scott. The
Well, I
history
think it's, Larry, it's fascinating to me because again, the beauty of the time that we're living in is that inspiration happens instantly, and people. I know a guy in Northern Ireland who's making this incredible pizza because he's inspired by videos he sees on YouTube of people in New York, whatever. That happens so quickly. But then the other edge of the sword is people tend to take it for granted, and then they make up. People like to look at something and come up with a rationalization for it. And my mission and what we do, our mission with the pizza tours, is to scrub that rationalization and to replace it with fact-based. There's history that you don't need to rationalize. Oh, they must make Detroit style pizza with the sauce on top because it's tastier. And like, no, they were probably doing it because the cheese they were using was very fatty and it would rip apart and grease out and burn. And if you invert the toppings, you prevent that from happening. There's logic. And we're living at a time where people can ignore logic because it's easier to come up with some other theory.
Well, we've reached that time, Scott, because I know we can go on for hours. That time is our enemy. And we have to pull this one to a close. But before we come back to you for that one last little tidbit, which should include how people get a hold of you for your pizza tour, let's thank Ed Flanagan and the Era Group. Listen, if you just pay invoices and have no idea what you've just ordered and what you just got, if your contracts seem a little bit off, call Ed Flanagan and the Era Group. Their people will sift through your invoices to make sure you got what you paid for and paid the right price for it. And or they will look through your contracts to make sure that there isn't a better deal out there someplace. So call Ed Flanagan in the Era Group, and they will claw back some of that money that you've been just letting fly out the window. Listen, Scott, give us that last bit of information, and plus how people get a hold of you, because I think a few people come to New York and want to eat pizza. So let us know.
It's very easy to get a hold of me. You just go to scottspizzatours.com or on all the social medias. It's just Scott's Pizza Tours. Or you can find me through Slice Out Hunger, which is the nonprofit that I run. We're a network of 800 pizzerias across the United States that are all working to fight food insecurity through the power of pizza. And the last thing that I leave you with here is in our conversation about is pizza jumping the shark and becoming the flavored vodka, what I say is this, is that when you look back, at the dawn of time for pizza, it was a place for experimentation. And without experimentation, we wouldn't be talking about it because pizza would have become fossilized, and the form of that fossilization would have been a version of it that I bet most of us wouldn't like today. And so why thank evolution? Because evolution of that food has made it possible for us to have this conversation.
Thank you, Scott. Fred, anything to say?
I think what used to be a bread basket is now a pizza menu. I think that's the initial signature that a operator should be thinking about looking at.
I thank you, Fred. I thought I had my mind set on pizza until we went to Italy, and I had to deliver a package to a restaurateur in Rome. And the guy was overjoyed that I delivered this package of pictures to him. And he treated Mona and myself out to dinner. And he said, don't order. He's going to bring out food. And he brought us out a pizza to start off as an appetizer. And that pizza was this puffy dough with herbs and olive oil and a little bit of onion on it. And Mona and I looked at each other and we ate it. And it was changed my mind on pizza, opened up a lot of doors, that pizza just doesn't have to be red, white, and green. And so, those of you who are listening that have their minds closed, try something daring. Try even simplistic, but try something different. Well, like I said, we're going to be back again tomorrow with a new show. We're going to do one of our educational shows tomorrow. But until then, I only have two things to say. Everybody, stay positive, test negative, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye now, folks.